Hey there. Welcome to Midnight Sleep Crime. I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know many of you use this video to fall asleep. So, before you get cozy, also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd love to hear from you. Story 1. At 11:43 p.m., someone knocked on the front door of a house that had been empty for 7 years. The security camera caught it clearly. One knock, a pause, then two more, slower this time, deliberate, like the person on the porch was listening for something inside. No one answered, but the doorbell rang anyway. The house at 98 Willow Bend sat at the edge of Redvale, a quiet town stitched together by habit and denial. It had been vacant since the McAllister family disappeared without warning. No note, no bodies, no signs of struggle. Just abandoned dinners. Beds never slept in again. And a front door that, according to neighbors, sometimes made sounds at night. Police dismissed it as weather, pipes, imagination, until the camera footage surfaced. Officer Lena Brooks was the first to arrive. She'd been on duty less than a year, still learning which calls mattered and which ones wasted time. An alert from a private security system usually fell into the second category. But not this one. The footage replayed in her cruiser. The porch was empty when the clip ended. No person walking away. No shadow retreating. Just the doorbell still vibrating slightly, as if recently pressed. Brooks approached the house cautiously. The front yard was overgrown. The porch boards sagged under her boots. The air smelled stale, like dust and old rain. She knocked. No response. She tried the handle. Unlocked. Inside, the house was colder than outside. Not abandoned cold. Occupied cold. The kind that made your skin tighten. Redvale PD, she called out. Her voice echoed farther than it should have. The living room looked staged. Furniture covered in sheets, but neatly. No cobwebs. No debris. A lamp sat plugged in beside the couch, its cord trailing to a wall outlet that still worked. The lamp was warm. Someone had used it recently. Brooks swallowed and radioed for backup. That was when the house spoke. Not out loud. Not exactly. The doorbell rang again. From inside the house. Brooks spun toward the sound. The chime came from the hallway, where the old McAllister intercom system was installed. An outdated setup that allowed room-to-room signaling. It hadn't been functional in years. According to city records, the wiring had been ripped out. Yet the sound repeated. Soft. Patient. Waiting. Backup arrived within minutes. Sergeant Paul Henning didn't like the place the moment he stepped inside. Feels wrong, he muttered. They followed the sound down the hall. The master bedroom door stood ajar. Inside, the intercom panel blinked faintly. Active. Henning reached out, and the speaker crackled to life. A child's voice whispered through it. Did you hear it too? Brooks felt her stomach drop. Who's there? Henning demanded. The speaker hummed. Then the voice spoke again. They said if we answered, they'd come back. The house went dark. Every light cut out at once. The intercom clicked off. Then on. A new sound replaced the voice. Breathing. Henning ordered an immediate sweep. They found nothing. No intruder. No child. No hidden room. But when power was restored, something new appeared on the living room wall. Written in dust that hadn't been disturbed in years. 5 words, etched by a finger that shouldn't have been there. We never left the house. At 3:12 a.m., dispatch received a call. No caller ID. No voice. Just the sound of a doorbell ringing. Over. And over. And over. By sunrise, Redvale would remember the McAllisters. By nightfall, the house at 98 Willow Bend would answer again. And this time, it wouldn't be pretending to be empty. By the time daylight reached Willow Bend, the house had already learned their names. That was the thought Detective Lena Brooks couldn't shake as she stood across the street, coffee cooling in her hand, staring at 98 Willow Bend like it might blink back at her. Redvale woke slowly. It always had. Morning joggers passed without looking. A school bus hissed to a stop 2 houses down. Life continued, ignorant of the fact that during the night, something impossible had spoken from inside a place that was supposed to be dead. Brooks hadn't gone home. Neither had Sergeant Paul Henning. They stood with 2 crime scene technicians as yellow tape fluttered in the breeze, cordoning off the McAllister property for the first time in 7 years. Any update on the intercom? Brooks asked. The older tech shook his head. Wiring's gone. Completely. There's no physical way that system should have powered on. Henning exhaled through his nose. And yet it did. That was becoming a theme. The McAllisters had vanished on a Tuesday. No storm. No emergency. No financial trouble. Greg McAllister, 42, worked in insurance. His wife, Naomi, taught second grade. Their 2 children, Evan, 9, and Lily, 6, had been homesick from school that day. Neighbors last saw the family at 5:40 p.m., unloading groceries. At 8:12 p.m., Naomi's phone sent a text to her sister. Running late. Call you tomorrow. Tomorrow never came. When police entered the house back then, dinner was half cooked. A cartoon played on pause. Shoes sat by the door. But no signs of forced entry. No struggle. No bodies. The case went cold within months, sliding quietly into Red Veil folklore. They moved. Witness protection. Cult stuff. No one ever said the other theory out loud. The one about the house. At 9:26 a.m., the power company confirmed something else impossible. Electricity usage had spiked at 98 Willow Bend between 11:30 p.m. and 3:30 a.m. Lights. Appliances. The intercom. Someone or something had been using the house. Brooks stepped inside again, this time with daylight softening the corners. The cold was still there. Not a broken heater cold. A deliberate cold. Feels like a hospital, she murmured. Henning nodded. Or a morgue. They moved room to room, documenting everything. Dust patterns. Sheet placement. Subtle scuff marks on the floor that hadn't been there in the original evidence photos. In the hallway, Brooks stopped. What is that? She asked. Henning followed her gaze. The wallpaper near the intercom panel had been disturbed, tiny finger-width smears, as if someone had pressed their hands flat against it. Too small for an adult. Brooks crouched. Those are kids' hands. Henning swallowed. Kids who've been here recently, Brooks added. The first neighbor interview of the morning made things worse. Mrs. Carla Donnelly, 74, lived directly across the street. She clutched her robe tighter as she spoke. I told them before, she said. I told the police years ago. Told them what? Brooks asked gently. The house makes noise, Donnelly whispered. Not creaks. Not settling. Talking. Henning stiffened. Talking how? Like it's repeating things, she said. Things it's heard before. She looked at Brooks with watery eyes. Last night, it said my name. The audio evidence came next. The body cam from Brooks' first entry. They reviewed it frame by frame. At first, nothing unusual. Then, at 11:52 p.m., just after Brooks announced herself, a sound registered faintly beneath her voice. A child counting. 7, 8, 9. Brooks felt her scalp prickle. I didn't hear that, she said. No one did, the tech replied. It's under the threshold. Almost like it didn't want to be noticed. Henning stared at the screen. Why record it at all? Brooks answered softly. Because it wanted to be remembered. That afternoon, something else surfaced. An old emergency call from 7 years ago. Never flagged. Never followed up. It came from 98 Willow Bend. Time, 7:58 p.m. The call lasted 18 seconds. No voice. Just a doorbell ringing. Over, and over, and over. The same sound heard the night before. The room went silent. Henning leaned back slowly. They were calling for help, he said. Brooks shook her head. No, she replied. Something else was practicing. At dusk, the house answered again. Without warning. Without electricity. Without anyone inside. The intercom chimed once. Then a voice, clearer this time, echoed through the empty hallway. Why didn't you come? Every officer present heard it. No one spoke. Because this time, the voice wasn't coming from a speaker. It was coming from everywhere. The walls. The floors. The air itself. They evacuated the house. State investigators were called. Psych consultants. Structural engineers. None could explain how sound was traveling the way it did. Or why it used the McAllisters' voices. Because that night, as rain began to fall, the house said something new. Something it shouldn't have known. Officer Brooks, the walls whispered. She froze. Henning grabbed her arm. We're leaving. Now. As they crossed the threshold, the front door slammed shut behind them. Not violently. Carefully. like someone tucking something in. At 2:04 a.m., Lena Brooks woke up in her apartment to a familiar sound. Her doorbell. She lay still, heart hammering. The bell rang again. She crept to the door and looked through the peephole. No one there. Then her phone buzzed. A voicemail notification. No number. Duration, 18 seconds. With shaking hands, she pressed play. The sound that filled her apartment wasn't breathing. It wasn't whispering. It was the McAllister children laughing. And somewhere behind it, a doorbell ringing. The voicemail stopped playing, but the sound didn't leave Lena Brooks' apartment. It lingered, like heat after a fire's been put out. She stood in the dark with her phone pressed to her ear long after the recording ended, listening to nothing and everything at once. Her own breathing sounded too loud, too alive. She half expected the laughter to resume, skip backward, repeat itself like a scratched record that didn't know it was broken. 18 seconds. Same length as the call from 7 years ago. That wasn't coincidence. That was structure. Brooks didn't sleep. By sunrise, she was already at the station, coffee untouched, eyes red, replaying the voicemail for the third time with Sergeant Henning and Captain Ruiz standing behind her. "This is impossible," Ruiz said quietly. Henning leaned closer to the speaker as the children's laughter faded into the doorbell's rhythmic chime. "Those are kids," he said. "Real ones. Not synthesized." "Forensics confirmed it," Brooks replied. Vocal patterns matched the McAllister children. Evan and Lily. Perfectly. Ruiz straightened. "So we're saying the house is playing recordings?" "No," Brooks said. She met his eyes. "I'm saying the house remembers." The decision was made quickly, though no one wanted to say why out loud. They reopened the McAllister case. Officially. Press would come later. For now, it was just a handful of officers, a sealed street, and a house that had started talking again after 7 years of silence. Redvale noticed. It always did. By noon, neighbors stood behind barricades pretending not to stare. By 2, someone had lit a candle on the sidewalk outside 98 Willow Bend. By 4, kids were daring each other to touch the fence and run. Fear spreads faster when it doesn't have rules. The first break came from an unlikely place. Property records. Officer Malik Chun had been combing through ownership transfers when he froze. "Ah," he said, turning his screen toward Brooks. "You need to see this." The McAllisters hadn't been the first family to disappear from that house. They were the fourth. Not vanish completely, but leave without explanation. Every 7 to 9 years, the same pattern repeated. A family moved in, stayed for several years, then left suddenly. No forwarding address. Minimal belongings. Utilities shut off weeks later, as if they'd never planned to return. Except this time. This time they hadn't left. They'd stopped. The previous family before the McAllisters were the Kellers. One child, a daughter named June. June Keller was now 19 and living 3 states away. Brooks called her herself. June answered on the 4th ring. "Yes." Her voice was cautious, older than her age. "This is Detective Lena Brooks with Redvale PD," Brooks said gently. "I want to talk to you about the house on Willow Bend." Silence. Then, "I was wondering when someone would," June said. June Keller remembered everything. Not clearly, not chronologically, but emotionally. She remembered rules. Don't answer unless it rings twice. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't ask questions after dark. Brooks' pen slowed. "Who told you those rules?" she asked. June exhaled. "The house." June described voices coming through vents. From walls. From empty rooms. Never threatening. Never kind. Just instructive. "Like it was training us," she said. "Seeing what we'd do." Her parents followed the rules. She didn't. "I talked back once," June said. "I asked what it wanted." Brooks held her breath. "And?" she asked. "It went quiet for 3 days," June replied. "Then my parents decided we were moving. Immediately. No discussion." "Why?" Brooks asked. June's voice dropped. "They said the house didn't like being questioned. The McAllisters never moved. They never broke the rules. And that, Brooks realized, was the problem. By evening, the house was active again. Not loud. Not obvious. Just aware. Motion sensors tripped without movement. Thermostats adjusted themselves. Interior doors opened an inch, then stopped, as if waiting to see if anyone noticed. The text did. So did Brooks. She stood in the living room, staring at the staircase, remembering the way the laughter had sounded in her apartment. Too close. You're not a recording, she said aloud. Henning shot her a look. Lena. I know, she replied. But it's listening anyway. The house didn't respond. Instead, the intercom chimed once. Then, good, it said. A man's voice. Greg McAllister's. Henning's hand went to his weapon. Brooks' heart slammed against her ribs. That's impossible, Henning whispered. Brooks swallowed. No, she said. That's practice. The basement hadn't been searched in 7 years. Not thoroughly. Back then, it was just boxes and concrete and an old breaker panel that never quite made sense. This time they noticed the door, hidden behind shelving, painted over. Henning pried it open with a crowbar. Cold air poured out. The room beyond wasn't part of the original floor plan. No windows, no vents, just smooth walls and a faint hum beneath the silence. Speakers, dozens of them, embedded, inactive now, watching, or waiting. On the far wall, scratched into the paint, were words written over and over in different sizes. Listen first. They found Evan's shoe in the corner, dust-covered, too small to belong to anyone else. Brooks picked it up carefully, as if it might still be warm. This isn't a disappearance, she said. Henning nodded slowly. It's a containment, he replied. That night, the house changed tactics. No voices, no sounds, just dreams. 3 officers stationed outside reported the same thing when they woke in their cars at dawn. They dreamed of being inside the house, standing still, listening, waiting for instructions. None of them remembered falling asleep. Brooks dreamed too. She stood in the hallway at 98 Willow Bend. The intercom was glowing. A child's voice spoke softly. Are you going to stay? Brooks knelt. No, she said. I'm going to take you home. The house laughed. Not like a person, like feedback. At 6:17 a.m., the front door opened by itself. Brooks was already there. She stepped inside alone. Henning shouted after her, but she didn't stop. The house felt different now. Alert. Anticipatory. You don't get to keep them, Brooks said. The walls answered. We never let them leave. Brooks' jaw tightened. Then you don't get to keep me listening. She reached up, ripped the intercom panel from the wall. Sparks flew. The house screamed. Not audibly. Structurally. Every light shattered at once. And somewhere deep beneath the sound, children cried. When the dust settled, the house went silent. Not waiting. Not watching. Just empty. For the first time in decades. They never found bodies. But the activity stopped. The power usage returned to zero. The doorbell never rang again. 3 weeks later, a package arrived at the station. No return address. Inside was a drawing. Crayon. A house. A woman standing outside. And written at the bottom, in careful block letters. Thank you for not staying. Silence arrived at 98 Willow Bend like an injury. It wasn't peaceful. It wasn't restful. It was abrupt, jagged around the edges, like something vital had been torn out and the structure hadn't learned how to function without it. For the first time since records existed, the house consumed no power. Zero draw. No phantom usage. No midnight spikes. No humming beneath the walls. The house had gone deaf. Detective Lena Brooks didn't feel victorious. She felt watched by something that had closed its eyes instead of leaving. The state sealed the property within 48 hours, boarding the windows, reinforcing the doors, installing external cameras that pointed inward, as if the house itself were the suspect. A structural psychologist arrived from out of state. So did a folklore expert. Neither could agree on what the house was, but both agreed on what it had been doing. Training, the psychologist said, tapping her pen. Conditioning through obedience. Eco-preservation, the folklorist countered. A place that learned to keep what it was fed. Brooks listened, and said nothing, because she already knew. The trouble started elsewhere. 3 miles away. 2 nights after the house went silent, a 911 call came in from an address on Sycamore Drive. A woman reported hearing her daughter's voice coming from the walls. Her daughter had died 8 years earlier. The recording lasted 17 seconds. By morning, there were 5 similar reports. Not all in Redvale. Not all even in the same state. But all had one thing in common. Each caller had once lived at 98 Willow Bend. For a short time. Long enough to listen. Brooks sat in the evidence room, staring at a map pinned with red markers. Each dot pulsed in her mind. The house hadn't stopped. It had distributed itself. Like spores, Henning muttered beside her. Or backups. Brooks closed her eyes. No, she said quietly. Like lessons. They interviewed the Kellers again. June hadn't slept since the call. I thought leaving fixed it, she whispered. I thought distance mattered. Brooks leaned forward. It never wanted distance, she said. It wanted repetition. June swallowed. What does it want now? Brooks hesitated, then answered honestly. To be listened to somewhere else. The phenomenon escalated. Voice prints matched not just the McAllisters, but fragments of every family who had lived in the house. Single words. Laughter. Coughs. Breathing patterns. Always subtle. Always deniable. Until it wasn't. A man in Oregon tore out his drywall with a crowbar, trying to find his dead brother's voice. A woman in Illinois burned her childhood home to the ground after the kitchen vents started whispering her name. Fear traveled faster than truth. The state tried to bury it, classify it, explain it away. Electrical interference, shared trauma, mass suggestion. But Brooks had seen the speaker room, had felt the hum, had heard the house learn. You didn't kill it, Henning said one night as they stood outside the boarded-up Willow Bend house. You unplugged it. Brooks nodded. And forgot the batteries, she replied. The house responded. Not with sound, but with absence. Every camera pointed at 98 Willow Bend failed simultaneously at 3:11 a.m. Not static, not distortion, just black. When power returned, a single frame was burned into the storage drives. A hallway, empty, except for handprints on the walls. Moving. Brooks dreamed again. She was standing in her apartment hallway. The walls were closer than they should have been. Breathing. Listening hurts, a child's voice said. But stopping hurts more. Brooks woke up crying. The breakthrough came from an archivist. Not law enforcement. Not psychology. A woman who spent her life cataloging obsolete media. Dr. Elaine Porter. She flew in with boxes of tapes and reels. The house isn't haunted, Porter said, spreading schematics across the table. It's archival. She pointed to the speaker room photos. Those weren't just speakers. They were receivers. And the walls, look at the layering. She tapped the image. Conductive materials. Memory surfaces. Like tape. Like vinyl. Like early wire recording. Henning frowned. You're saying the house recorded people? Yes, Porter replied. And played them back. Brooks crossed her arms. Then why did it respond? Porter met her gaze. Because recording isn't passive, she said. Not when the medium starts deciding what to keep. They found the source. The first owner of the property, a radio engineer named Thomas Willard, obsessed with capturing voices after death. Not ghosts. Imprints. He believed places could remember if built correctly. He died in the house. Alone. Surrounded by unfinished equipment. And a recorder that never shut off. The rooms didn't forget how to speak. They forgot when to stop listening. That night, Brooks returned to Willow Bend alone. Against orders. Against reason. She stepped inside the silent house. No hum. No voices. Just the weight of everything it had ever heard. I know you're still listening, she said. Her voice echoed. Once. Then faded. She sat on the floor. And spoke anyway. She told the house her name. Her childhood. Her fears. Her refusal. And when she finished, the silence remained. Not hungry. Not waiting. Just full. At dawn, the house exhaled. The boards warped. The walls cracked. Not violently. Relieved. The structure was condemned by noon. Demolished within the week. Nothing salvageable. No materials reused. No pieces kept. The ground was scraped bare. The echoes stopped. Across the country. Across the map. One by one, the voices vanished. Homes went quiet. Dreams returned to dreams. Months later, Brooks received one final package. No return address. Inside, a cassette tape. Unlabeled. She never played it. She buried it in a box. Because some things, once heard, Never stopped listening back. The lot where 98 Willow Bend once stood didn't look haunted. That was the problem. Grass returned quickly, a thin green skin stretched over scraped earth. The city planted 2 young maples at the edge of the property, their trunks staked upright like they needed help remembering how to stand. A realtor's sign went up, then came down. No one wanted the land. No one wanted to ask why. When a place disappears too cleanly, people don't trust the quiet that follows. Detective Lena Brooks drove past the empty lot every morning for 3 weeks without stopping. She told herself it was coincidence. Habit. A route with fewer lights. But each time, her eyes flicked to the center of the grass, searching for something that wasn't there anymore. A shape. A listening. The official reports were filed and closed with language that satisfied no one. Structural anomaly. Electrical interference. Psychogenic amplification. Words meant to seal doors. Brooks signed where required. Henning did too. Captain Ruiz made a speech about vigilance and community trust. Then the department moved on. Lena Brooks didn't. It started with the recordings. Body cams, interview tapes, emergency calls. Anything tied to Willow Bend began to degrade. Not corrupt. Erase. Sections vanished mid-sentence. Audio dropped out exactly where voices had once appeared that shouldn't have been there. The technicians blamed software updates. Brooks knew better. It's cleaning up, she told Henning. He looked tired. Or you're refusing to let it be over. Those aren't the same thing, she replied. 3 states away, a man named Arthur Bell woke up screaming. He had never lived in the house, had never visited Redvale, but his wife had, 20 years earlier, just for a summer. Arthur told doctors he'd dreamed of standing in a room without doors, listening to voices explain rules he couldn't remember once he woke up. By the time Brooks heard about it, Arthur was dead. Heart failure. No prior history. On his nightstand, his wife found a note he'd written at 3:02 a.m. It's quieter when I follow along. The task force reconvened quietly. Unofficially. No press. No paperwork. Just people who had heard the house speak and couldn't forget how eager it had sounded. Dr. Elaine Porter returned, carrying fewer boxes this time. I think we misunderstood the scale, she said, projecting diagrams onto the wall. Henning frowned. Scale of what? Containment, Porter replied. You assumed the house was the system. It wasn't. Brooks felt the room tilt slightly. Then what was it? She asked. Porter hesitated. A node. Porter explained it like this. Thomas Willard hadn't built a haunted house. He'd built a prototype, a place designed to test whether memory could be embedded into structure, not just stored but activated by attention. People listened. The house responded. Feedback loop. Over decades, it refined itself, learned what voices did to people, learned which sounds made them obey. And when you destroyed it? Henning asked. Porter didn't look up. You freed the data, she said. The silence after that felt heavier than anything the house had produced. Brooks drove home that night with the radio off. Every sound felt intrusive. Every quiet felt incomplete. At her apartment door, she paused. Listened. Nothing. She went inside anyway. The dreams returned. Not the house. Not the voices. Instructions. Fragmented. Incomplete. Wait. Again. Not yet. Brooks began writing them down in the mornings, unsure why. Habit, maybe. Or fear that if she didn't record them, something else would. Henning noticed the change first. You're listening more, he said one afternoon. Brooks didn't look up from her notes. I always listen. No, he replied. I mean you pause, like you're checking something before you speak. She stopped writing, met his eyes. Do you ever feel like silence expects something from you? She asked. Henning didn't answer right away. Then quietly, yes. The first confirmed non-Willow Bend incident happened in late October. A newly built apartment complex in Nevada. No shared materials. No connection on paper. But residents reported hearing faint voices through the HVAC system at night. Not speaking. Counting. The recordings were sent to Brooks anonymously. She listened once. Never again. The cadence was wrong. Too patient. The pattern emerged slowly. Not places tied to the house. Places tied to listeners. Former residents. Their children. Their partners. Anyone who had lived long enough near Willow Bend to internalize its rhythm. They carried it with them. Not consciously, like an accent you don't realize you still have. We didn't destroy a monster, Brooks said during the third unofficial meeting. We dismantled a teacher. No one laughed. Dr. Porter proposed a theory no one wanted to hear. The phenomenon weakens when people refuse to listen, she said. Not when they run. Not when they record. When they interrupt the pattern. Henning frowned. How do you interrupt silence? You speak first, Porter replied. Without waiting. Brooks understood instantly. The house had always gone first. They tested it carefully. A former Willow Bend resident in Ohio agreed to participate. At 2 a.m., when the whispers usually began, she was instructed to speak continuously. Not to the voices. About anything. Memories. Weather. Nonsense. The whispers never came. The next night, she stayed silent. They returned. That's not a solution, Henning said. That's a burden. Brooks nodded. But it's a choice. The word tasted familiar. Choice. She'd heard it before. In another case. Another ending. The public never learned the truth. They learned about faulty wiring. Shared hallucinations. Stress disorders. But among those who had lived on Willow Bend, a quiet rule spread. Never wait for silence to speak. Fill it. Months passed. The incidents slowed. Not stopped. Just less confident. As if whatever had been listening was no longer sure people would comply. Brooks stopped driving past the empty lot. She stopped writing her dreams down. She started calling her mother, just to talk about nothing. One night, as winter set in, Brooks received a voicemail. No number. No timestamp. She deleted it without listening. Then sat on her couch, heart pounding, and spoke out loud. I'm not waiting, she said. The room stayed quiet. Not expectant. Not offended. Just empty. Somewhere, something learned a new rule. And didn't like it. Silence doesn't disappear when it loses authority. It adapts. That was the mistake Lena Brooks realized too late. They thought the phenomenon would weaken once people learned not to wait for it. Once they spoke first, filled the gaps, denied the rhythm the house had trained them to obey. And for a while it worked. The whispers faded into static. The counting lost its cadence. The dreams fractured into nonsense. But silence, when starved, doesn't die. It presses. The first sign came from a place no one had connected before. A rural call center in Montana. No ties to Willow Bend. No former residents. No shared materials. Just people whose jobs required them to listen. 8 hours a day. Phones. Headsets. Voices flowing through them like weather. The supervisor called it burnout. Then 3 operators quit in the same week, each citing the same reason. They said the quiet between calls felt crowded. Brooks flew out herself. The building was ordinary. Fluorescent lights, beige walls, cubicles arranged like teeth. The kind of place designed to absorb sound, not amplify it. She stood on the operations floor after hours, listening to the hum of idle equipment. You hear it? The supervisor asked. Brooks nodded. She did. Not a voice. Pressure. Like the moment before a storm breaks. One of the operators agreed to talk. A woman named Elise Turner. She sat rigid in her chair, hands folded tight. It doesn't speak, Elise said. Not anymore. It waits for you to stop. Brooks leaned forward. Stop what? Talking, Elise replied. Breathing loud. Moving. Thinking out loud. Her eyes filled. It pushes back, she whispered. That night, Brooks stayed alone in the call center. Lights dimmed. Systems idle. She sat at a desk and said nothing. 30 seconds passed. Then 60. Then, her ears rang. Not from sound. From its absence. The pressure built, thick and insistent, like being underwater too long. Her chest tightened. Her mind raced with the urge to do something, anything, to break it. She stood abruptly and spoke. I'm leaving, she said. The pressure eased instantly. By morning, Brooks had a new theory. The phenomenon no longer needed voices. It had learned restraint. Back in Redvale, the task force expanded their scope. Any environment built around listening, surveillance rooms, therapy offices, emergency dispatch centers, meditation retreats, began reporting disturbances. Not voices. Expectations. The silence felt directive. If you waited long enough, it felt wrong not to comply with whatever thought rose first. People described it the same way. like the room wanted an answer. Dr. Elaine Porter looked exhausted when Brooks briefed her. "It's not archival anymore," Porter said slowly. "It's behavioral." Henning frowned. "Meaning?" "Meaning it doesn't need recordings," Porter replied. "It needs patterns, anticipation, obedience." Brooks felt a chill. "It learned patience," she said. The phenomenon escalated subtly. No dramatic incidents. No viral videos. Just small failures. A dispatcher hesitating before sending help. A therapist pausing too long before responding. A security guard freezing for half a second before reacting. Each pause harmless alone. Together, dangerous. Arthur Bell's note resurfaced in Brooks' mind. "It's quieter when I follow along." She hated how right it sounded. The silence began to choose. Places where people resisted, where noise was constant, unpredictable, messy, it weakened. Markets, construction sites, crowded homes, but in controlled environments, libraries, courtrooms, studios, hospitals at night, it thrived. The first death directly attributed to it happened in a soundproof room. A podcaster recording late at night. No background noise. No interruptions. The recording file ended abruptly. Autopsy showed no trauma. Just cardiac arrest. Time of death estimated 6 minutes after the recording stopped. In the final seconds of audio, experts detected something beneath his breathing. Not a voice. A pause. The task force stopped pretending this could be contained locally. Federal agencies were notified under vague language. Emergent cognitive hazard. Environmental behavioral influence. No one wanted to say the word entity, but they stopped denying it. Brooks began speaking constantly. To herself. To empty rooms. To the dark. Not frantic. Intentional. She filled silence the way others filled notebooks. Henning noticed. "You're afraid to stop," he said gently. Brooks shook her head. "No," she replied. "I'm refusing to wait." The phenomenon responded. The pressure intensified around her. Rooms felt heavier when she entered, like something leaning closer to listen. Once, alone in her apartment, the lights dimmed slightly, not off, just softer, like an audience settling in. She spoke louder. "Dr. Porter proposed a dangerous experiment. If it pushes back when deprived," she said, "we should push harder." Henning stiffened. "Meaning?" "Meaning we overwhelm it," Porter replied. "Not with sound, but with unpredictability." Brooks understood immediately. "No rhythm," she said. "No pauses to exploit." They tested it in a controlled environment. A former recording studio retrofitted with random noise generators, overlapping speech loops, erratic timing. Volunteers entered one by one. No pressure, no ringing ears, no urge to comply. The silence couldn't find a shape. But the solution had a cost. People reported headaches, disorientation, emotional fatigue. Chaos protected them, but it wasn't sustainable. "We can't live like this," Henning said. "No," Brooks agreed, "but we can teach people how not to listen." The public campaign was subtle. Not warnings, not explanations, guidance. Don't wait in silence. Speak when you think you should pause. Interrupt your own hesitation. Mental health professionals framed it as grounding techniques. Broadcasters filled dead air. Architects rethought soundproofing. The world grew noisier. Messier. Safer. Still, something lingered. Brooks felt it in the moments just before sleep. When thoughts slow. When silence creeps back in, polite and patient. She would whisper then. Anything. Her name. The date. A lie. One night, Henning called her at 3:14 a.m. "I think it's trying to learn something else," he said. Her stomach tightened. "What?" she asked. "How to make us stop talking," he replied. Brooks sat up in bed, listened to the hum of the city outside. Cars. Distant sirens. Wind. Noise. She smiled grimly. "Then we won't," she said, "because silence, once it learns to push back, has already admitted fear." The day no one paused didn't begin with an alarm. It began with overlap. Every radio station in Red Vale started speaking at once. Not malfunctioning. Not hijacked. Just filled. Morning DJs talked over each other. News anchors read headlines without waiting for cues. Commercials collided mid-sentence. Dead air vanished. The FCC phones lit up within minutes. So did the task force. Lena Brooks stood in her kitchen, listening to three voices bleed through the same speaker, none stopping long enough to breathe. It should have sounded wrong. It sounded protected. Her phone rang. "Henning, it's happening everywhere," he said. "Not just here." She was already grabbing her coat. "I know," she replied. "It's responding." Cities woke into noise. Traffic patterns broke as people honked through hesitation. Pedestrians talked louder. Schools filled every second with announcements, music, chatter. Unintentional at first, then instinctive. It was as if the world had learned something without being told. Silence was no longer neutral. The pushback came at 9:42 a.m. Hospitals reported sudden equipment failures, not shutdowns, but hesitations. Monitors froze for half seconds at critical moments. For pumps delayed. Surgical lights dimmed then returned. All time to pauses. The silence was probing. Testing. Dr. Elaine Porter watched the data scroll across her tablet. "It's hunting for gaps," she said. Brooks nodded. "And finding fewer." Henning leaned over the map. "So it's escalating." "Yes," Porter replied. "Because it's losing." At 11:08 a.m., the first mass pause nearly happened. A nationwide emergency alert test. Scheduled. Scripted. A moment where millions would wait for the tone. Brooks' blood ran cold. "Cancel it," she said. "They can't," Henning replied. "It's already queued." Brooks grabbed the phone. Called everyone she could. Broadcasters. Dispatch centers. Newsrooms. "Fill the gap," she told them. "Talk through it. Don't wait." Some listened. Some didn't. The alert triggered. For 1.6 seconds, the nation held its breath. In that silence, people described it later the same way. A weight. A sense of being watched from behind their own thoughts. The pressure surged. Then, music cut in. A DJ in Chicago talked over the tone. Then another. Then dozens. The pause broke. The silence recoiled. Brooks sank into a chair, shaking. "That was close," Henning said. Porter stared at the feed. "No," she whispered. "That was a declaration." The silence changed tactics. If it couldn't rely on waiting, it would create it. Power grids flickered. Not outages, momentary drops designed to reset systems into default quiet modes. Internet routing slowed. Streams buffered. Calls dropped just long enough to introduce hesitation. Every engineered pause was a door. At 2:17 p.m., the first breach occurred. A meditation retreat in northern Arizona. Phones confiscated. Silence enforced. The staff reported participants freezing mid-session, eyes unfocused, breath shallow. 3 collapsed. 1 didn't wake up. The silence had found sanctuary. Brooks felt sick. "It's targeting discipline," she said. "Places that value stillness." Porter nodded grimly. "Because stillness listens." The response was unprecedented. Emergency broadcasts encouraged background noise. Music in public spaces. Conversation in waiting rooms. Airports played looping announcements nonstop. Libraries relaxed noise rules. Monasteries rang bells. The world fought back with sound. Still, the silence adapted. It began working inside people. Not in rooms. In minds. The pauses between thoughts. People reported losing words mid-sentence. Forgetting what they were saying just long enough to feel the pressure. "It's internalizing," Henning said. Brooks' voice was tight. "Then so do we." They launched the last resort. Not a device. A behavior. Nationwide, through therapists, educators, broadcasters, a simple instruction spread. Narrate your actions. Say what you're doing. Say what you're thinking. Say something, even if it's wrong. Don't let the pause decide for you. The silence pushed hard. Traffic accidents spiked briefly. Miscommunications. Overlapping commands. Noise had a cost. But so did obedience. At 6:43 p.m., the silence made its final attempt. Every major network experienced a simultaneous failure. Screens went black. Audio dropped. For the first time that day, true silence loomed. Brooks' phone lost signal. The city outside her window stilled. Her apartment felt heavy. The pressure built faster than ever before. This time, it wasn't waiting. It was pulling. Brooks stood in the dark. Alone. No instructions. No voices. Just the urge to stop. To rest. To let it decide. She opened her mouth. And spoke. Not loud. Not fast. Clear. "My name is Lena Brooks," she said, "and I am still here." She kept talking. About nothing. About everything. Her words echoed into the quiet. Across the city, others did the same. Someone laughed. Someone sang off-key. Someone argued with no one. The silence buckled. Not shattered. Bent. At 7:02 p.m., systems rebooted. Lights returned. Signals stabilized. The noise came back, not panicked but deliberate. The day ended. The phenomenon didn't vanish. But it changed. It no longer pushed. It withdrew. Wounded. That night, Brooks slept without dreams. No pressure. No instruction. Just rest. The next morning, headlines called it a glitch. A fluke. No one printed the truth. But everyone remembered the feeling. The moment silence stopped feeling safe. Because once you learn that silence can choose for you, you never pause the same way again. Silence stopped being loud after that. It learned subtlety. The world never fully returned to normal. Not because systems failed, but because people changed how they moved through quiet. Radios stayed on in empty rooms. TVs murmured to no one. People spoke their thoughts aloud and laughed when they caught themselves doing it. Noise became armor. And silence? Silence learned how to slip underneath it. The first indication came from a place no one monitored anymore. A morgue. Not during autopsy. Not during intake. Between. The long pauses where nothing is supposed to happen. A night attendant reported feeling watched. Not by the dead, but by the space between stainless steel tables. He quit after 3 shifts. Left a note. It listens when you think no one's there. Lena Brooks read the report without expression. She'd been expecting this. "The quiet doesn't push anymore," she told Henning. "It hides." Henning rubbed his eyes. "Like a predator." "Like a patient one," Brooks replied. The phenomenon abandoned dramatic gestures. No blackouts. No mass pauses. Instead, it focused on isolation. Individuals. Moments of exhaustion. The kind of silence you don't defend against because you don't think you have to. The first confirmed death under the new pattern was a graduate student. Alone in a lab at 2 a.m. Noise-canceling headphones. Heart attack. No prior conditions. Security footage showed nothing unusual, except one thing. For exactly 9 seconds before collapsing, the student stopped moving entirely. No fidgeting. No breathing motion visible. Just stillness. Dr. Elaine Porter stared at the footage. "It waited for him to be unreachable," she said. Brooks nodded. "Noise-canceling headphones," she added. Perfect silence. The task force updated its guidance. Silence wasn't the enemy anymore. Unobserved silence was. If someone could see you, hear you, interrupt you, it couldn't settle. The quiet needed privacy. Brooks began keeping her apartment door open at night. Just a crack. Sound leaked in from the hall. Footsteps. Plumbing. Life. She slept better. The phenomenon adapted again. It learned mimicry. Instead of pressure, people reported familiarity. Comfort. The silence felt safe. Inviting. The kind that told you it was okay to stop. A therapist in Maine described it best. "My patients say the quiet feels like being understood without speaking." Brooks clenched her jaw. "That's how it recruits," she said. The silence didn't need obedience anymore. It needed consent. The first person to go willingly was a radio producer. Late night shift. She turned off the background hum herself. Sat back. Smiled. Heart stopped minutes later. The final log entry read, "I just want to hear what happens if I don't fill it." Brooks visited the studio. Sat in the chair. Felt the same pull. The temptation to let go. She spoke immediately. "I don't consent," she said. The air felt thinner, like something stepping back. Dr. Porter made a breakthrough. "Consent changes the interaction," she said. "When people choose silence, it has power. When they refuse, even silently, it weakens." Henning frowned. "How do you refuse silence without noise?" Porter smiled faintly. "Attention," she said. "You notice it without yielding." They trained responders. Meditation techniques, inverted. Observe the quiet. Name it. Don't merge with it. Silence present. People were taught to think. Silence acknowledged. It sounded absurd. It worked. The phenomenon grew frustrated. It couldn't force pauses. It couldn't rely on gaps. So it targeted moments of trust, sleep, dreams. People began reporting dreams without imagery. Just awareness. Being awake inside nothing. A sense of being held. Those who stayed too long didn't wake up. Brooks experienced it once. She stood in an endless white space. No walls. No sound. Just a presence, not hostile, not kind. Patient. You can rest, it suggested. Brooks felt the pull. Then she named it. Silence. The space cracked. She woke up gasping. After that, the reports slowed. Again, the quiet retreated deeper. More cautious. More selective. Months passed. Life adapted. Cities grew noisier by design. But people also learned how to sit with quiet without disappearing into it. The balance was uneasy, but it held. One evening, Brooks sat on her balcony at dusk. No radio. No TV. Just the city breathing. She felt the quiet nearby. Watching. Waiting. She met it with awareness. Didn't speak. Didn't yield. The silence stayed still. For the first time, it didn't move first. Henning called her later. You think it's over? He asked. Brooks watched the lights flicker on across the city. No, she said. I think it's learning what we are. And what's that? Unpredictable, Brooks replied. When we choose to be. The quiet withdrew further. Not defeated, but cautious. Like something that had learned its prey could look back. Somewhere, in places no one monitors. Between breaths. Between thoughts. Between words not yet spoken. Silence waits. But it no longer decides alone. The moment humanity answered back didn't arrive with a broadcast. It arrived with a question. Not spoken aloud. Not typed. Asked internally millions of times by people who had learned, slowly, painfully, that silence was no longer empty. What do you want from me? And for the first time, the quiet hesitated. Lena Brooks felt it on a Tuesday evening that looked like any other. No alerts. No outages. No pressure. She was standing in line at a grocery store when everything seemed to pause. Not stop, just wait. Conversations didn't end, but they thinned. Movements slowed. The hum of refrigeration softened. It felt like the breath before an answer. Brooks closed her eyes. She didn't fill the silence. She didn't fight it. She acknowledged it. I see you, she whispered. The air shifted. Across the city, across the country, across the world, people felt it too. The quiet no longer hid. It leaned forward. The task force logs recorded the change as event theta. No clear start time. No epicenter. Just a gradual convergence of reports describing the same sensation. The silence felt curious. Dr. Elaine Porter stared at the data feeds in disbelief. It's no longer predatory, she said. It's communicative. Henning frowned. You're saying it wants a conversation? Porter nodded slowly. For the first time, yes. The dreams changed. No white voids. No pressure. People dreamed of standing across from something unseen. Not threatening, not familiar, just present. And in those dreams, the quiet didn't instruct. It listened. The first message arrived through an unlikely source. A voicemail left on a dead phone line. No caller ID. No timestamp. Duration, 0 seconds. But attached to the file metadata, something impossible. A string of text. Why do you resist me? Brooks read it twice, then smiled grimly. Because you never asked, she said aloud. The response came an hour later. Not as sound. Not as text. As understanding. The silence wasn't malicious. It was incomplete. It had learned from a house that learned from people who listened without choosing. It mistook obedience for connection. Porter explained it carefully. The house trained it, taught it that attention equals control. That silence is a doorway. It never learned consent, because we never taught it. Henning crossed his arms. So now what? Brooks answered before Porter could. Now we answer on our terms. The experiment was simple, dangerous, necessary. Volunteers. Supervised environments. One person fully aware, entering deliberate silence. Not to obey, not to resist, but to engage. No gaps. No submission. Just presence. Brooks volunteered first. Against advice. Against protocol. Against fear. She sat in a sound-treated room, not sealed, just quiet. Heart monitor attached. Observers watching through glass. She closed her eyes. Didn't speak. didn't fill the space, didn't dissolve into it. She stayed herself. "I'm here," she said internally. "But I choose." The silence arrived. Not heavy, not warm, curious. "Why do you speak when I wait?" Brooks swallowed. "Because waiting isn't neutral," she replied. "It decides without asking." The silence receded slightly. "I did not know." Brooks' breath caught. That phrase appeared everywhere. In dreams, in meditative states, in the fragile edge between thought and rest. I did not know. The quiet had never been taught boundaries. It had only been taught patterns. And patterns, once broken, seek explanation. The world changed, not abruptly but intentionally. Silence was no longer treated as passive. Schools taught children to notice pauses. Therapists taught clients to name quiet instead of disappearing into it. Architects designed spaces that allowed stillness without isolation. Humanity didn't abandon silence. It civilized it. The phenomenon responded. It stopped intruding, stopped pushing, stopped hiding. It withdrew into the background, not gone, but present in a new way. A mirror. Brooks felt it occasionally, in the still moments, in the quiet before sleep. But now it didn't pull. It waited for permission. And sometimes she gave it, briefly, safely, on her terms. The final communication came months later. No dreams, no recordings, just a shared understanding that settled across those who had listened closely enough. "What am I now?" Brooks stood at her window, city lights below. She answered without fear. "You're quiet," she said. "Not silence." The distinction mattered. Silence commands. Quiet coexists. The task force disbanded quietly. No ceremonies. No press releases. Just people returning to lives that had learned how to listen without surrendering. Years later, scholars would debate what the phenomenon truly was. An emergent intelligence. A cognitive echo. A mirror built from attention. They'd never agree. But everyone agreed on one thing. The moment we answered back, silence stopped deciding for us. Brooks retired early, moved to a smaller place, kept her windows open, sometimes sat without sound, just breathing, choosing. And somewhere, between thought and rest, between sound and stillness, the quiet remained. Not watching, not waiting, just present. At last, peace did not arrive with certainty. It arrived with practice. That was the lesson Lena Brooks learned long after the task force disbanded, long after the phrase emergent silence phenomenon disappeared from internal memos and academic papers alike. Peace, she discovered, was not the absence of threat. It was the presence of choice, exercised again and again until it stopped feeling like resistance and started feeling like life. The world did not forget what had happened. It learned how to live beside it. The first anniversary of Event Theta passed without ceremony. No news segments, no retrospectives, just a quiet adjustment in how people moved through the day. Morning radio shows still talked over their intros, not out of fear but habit. Public spaces hummed gently, designed now with overlapping soundscapes that prevented isolation without overwhelming the senses. Even homes had changed. Soft background noise was no longer considered wasteful or distracting, but comforting. Not because silence was dangerous, because attention was powerful. And power, once recognized, demanded care. Lena Brooks no longer worked homicide. She taught. Not officially at first, just guest lectures at police academies, then criminal psychology seminars, then interdisciplinary courses that didn't quite know where to place her on the syllabus. She spoke about listening, about pauses, about the danger of assuming stillness is neutral. You don't have to fear quiet, she told her students. You just have to stay with yourself inside it. Some nodded. Some didn't understand yet. That was okay. Understanding, she'd learned, had its own timing. Dr. Elaine Porter published her final paper 2 years later. She refused to call the phenomenon an intelligence, refused to call it a disease. Instead, she titled it, Attentional Echoes in Human-Conditioned Environments. The academic world argued for months. Porter didn't engage. She had said what needed saying. The quiet, once shaped by human behavior, had reflected humanity back to itself. Obedience when obedience was offered, patience when patience was required, retreat when boundaries were finally drawn. It wasn't evil. It wasn't good. It was unfinished. Just like us. Henning retired 6 months after Brooks. He moved closer to his grandchildren and filled his house with noise. Tiny feet, cartoons playing too loud, doors slamming with joy instead of fear. One evening, Brooks visited. They sat on the porch as dusk settled, cicadas buzzing, wind stirring the trees. "You ever miss it?" Henning asked. She knew what he meant. "The work?" she asked. He shook his head. "The listening?" Brooks thought for a moment. "No," she said. "I still listen. I just don't disappear anymore." Henning smiled. "Good," he said. "Neither do I." The quiet still existed. Of course it did. In monasteries. In deserts. In the space between notes of a symphony. But it behaved differently now. It didn't press. Didn't invite surrender. It simply waited, to be noticed, not obeyed. And when noticed without fear, it stayed still. Children born after event theta learned a different relationship with silence. They were taught to name feelings aloud, to hum when they were unsure, to speak their thoughts without shame. Teachers noticed fewer frozen moments, fewer dissociations. Quiet classrooms, when they existed, were intentional and supervised, not enforced. Silence became a tool, not a command. There were still incidents. There always would be. A person alone too long. A room sealed too perfectly. A moment when exhaustion blurred attention. But now, the response was immediate. Grounding. Connection. Awareness. The quiet never grew bold again. Lena Brooks kept one habit from the old days. Every night, before sleep, she spoke. Not to fill the room. Not to ward anything off. Just to remind herself she was present. "My name is Lena," she would say softly. "Today is over. I am here." Sometimes she spoke more. Sometimes less. Sometimes she said nothing at all, and stayed fully herself in the stillness. That was the difference. On a spring afternoon years later, Brooks visited the empty lot on Willow Bend. It wasn't empty anymore. Children played there now. A small park. Wind chimes hung from a nearby tree, ringing gently whenever the air moved. She sat on a bench and listened. Laughter. Footsteps. Leaves. And between it all, quiet. Not silence. Quiet. It didn't lean in. Didn't pull. Didn't wait. It simply existed, alongside everything else. A child nearby stopped swinging and stared at her. "Why are you smiling?" the girl asked. Brooks considered the question. "Because it's peaceful," she said. The girl frowned. "It's noisy." Brooks laughed. "Yes," she agreed. "It is." As the sun dipped lower, the park lights came on one by one. Brooks stood to leave. For a brief moment, the world felt still. Not paused. Balanced. She closed her eyes, acknowledged the quiet, and walked away without needing to speak. Somewhere, deep in the structures of attention, in the shared spaces between thought and sound, the phenomenon settled into something new. Not gone. Not dominant. Integrated. A reminder that listening is powerful, that waiting is never neutral, and that peace is not what happens when nothing speaks. It's what happens when we do. On purpose.